let's get straight into it. Why we're here today. Today, I want to talk to you about retrospectives. And I want retrospectives to strike back in our companies, bring them back to life, because they're such an important Agile ceremony. So, what am I going to talk to you today? Just a brief intro into what they are, just so we're all on the same page. Why I think you should change the format that most people use, which is what works well, what doesn't work well, what still puzzles me. And finally, introducing lots of new, fun, different, great ways to run your retrospectives. So let's get straight into it. So, what are retrospectives? Well, Esther Derby summarises it with this great quote. She's done a lot of research into retrospectives, written a book with a lady called Diana Larson, and she summarises it like this. Agile retrospectives are a special meeting where a team steps back, examines the way they work, and identifies ways that they can improve. It's all about coming together as a team on a regular basis, fortnightly, weekly, whenever it is, and we reflect as a team, work out how we're going, and then identify ways to improve. So some people even go to the extent of saying it's the most important Agile practice out there. I've got a couple of people here tweeting about it. Esther herself is agreeing with this retweet. So I want to open it to you and ask you a question. And so I'll need a bit of participation here for a few minutes. So would you agree, and probably more importantly, why are retrospectives important? So I'll take a couple of questions. Yeah,
I would agree because it's stacked and depth. You do something, you look how it works, and after that, okay, did it go well or was it awful? And you can say, okay, let's try it in the next sprint or the next 2 weeks, whatever.
Good stuff. Yeah, hand over here.
Yep, okay. A good retrospective works really well. The problem I've found is it's hard to get the good ones.
Exactly. And that's why I want to talk about them today. I'll take a final quote yet.
I think they work really well, and two bits of feedback I got from good retrospectives were they're good for bonding the team and growing the team.
Yeah, all very valid points. I'll have to just move on to make sure I can teach you all of these great techniques. But what it kind of comes down to is all about continuous improvement. It's all about using this workshop with the main aim to continuously improve. So, why should we bother changing? Why should we move away from what works well, what doesn't work well, and what still puzzles me? Well, personally, I have a few issues with this particular technique. As Esther explains in her book, using these questions, what works well, what doesn't work well, and what still puzzles me, off the bat, without gathering any insight or data about what's going on in your team, so like how many story points did we achieve in the last fortnight, if that's what we're tracking, or what's our cycle time, or just what did we deliver. If you're not presenting these facts and this information, then we're kind of asking questions without any data to support it. We're asking for insight without this. Also, I find that if you use the same old format every single time, you get the same outcome. You're asking the same question, you're probably going to get the same answer, which is what I found. And finally, I think it's a bit boring. There's so many more fun ways out there to run your retrospectives. So let's spend the rest of our time going through all of them. So the first one, the emotional timeline, as I like to call it. You might also know it as the timeline retrospective. A great way to reflect on a long period of time, say the end of a project and a release, or just if you haven't done a retrospective for a couple of months. What I'm going to do with each of these techniques is explain to you just generally what they're about, provide you instructions on how to run it as the facilitator, or just tips to pick up if you're participating in the retro, and then some of my own personal reflections from using these, so telling you a few stories along the way. So, how does the emotional timeline work? As a facilitator, we want to draw the axes on our whiteboard. And we ask the team, using colour-coded sticky notes, it doesn't particularly matter what colour they are, but just as long as you've got a legend, we want to reflect on three things. What are good events that have happened in this time period? What are some problematic ones? And what have been some significant ones? So these might be a person left or joined the team we had a release, kind of what are the milestones that have happened along the way. So we allow the team to use their sticky notes and personally reflect using Sharpies and just do that for about 5 minutes. I find it's generally good to time box this kind of gathering exercise to get all the facts, all the events that have happened. And then we ask the team to just put them in rough chronological order up on the board. So from on the left-hand side, the furthest away, so say if it's 3 months ago, to the right-hand side, which is basically now. So once we do this, we go through all of the notes and discuss them as a team and identify what was going on during this time period. We say, okay, there's a cluster of some problematic ones. What was going on? Was there some commonalities? And we discuss as a team being open and vulnerable to each other and work out ways, how can we improve and identify actions from this. So we're writing up the actions as we go. Well, what this technique does is it doesn't just look at the factual side, it looks at the emotional side and realise that we're all kind of human and we have good and bad days. And that's exactly what we capture. So using whiteboard markers, we just use anonymous dot votes along the way and just everyone in the team comes up and writes or puts their dot of how they're feeling. And you might even be able to get a trend line of just what was the overall vibe within the team. So from there, then you can discuss what was happening along the way using the events as kind of your grounding place to work out, why was the team feeling, a bit down during the middle, or looking for outliers with an individual. And that's what we did. So from that, we identified actions and went away. So where I've ran this was with the team that I just joined at the REA Group, or realestate.com. And it was a small team, about 3 developers, and they've been together for 3 months. So I just joined and realised that they'd never run a retrospective. So I said, great, let's give this a go and just work out what's happened in the team and how we can improve. So we did this, and we did get some actions out of the events, but something really stuck out when we went to the emotional side. Is there was a really sudden drop in someone's emotions along the way. They were feeling really unhappy. And said, what's going on? Why did you feel like this during this time period? And he explained to us, during this time I was trying to set up a new tool in our environment. It was called CartoDB, which is a geospatial tool. And trying to just set this up on Macs. And it was ridiculously frustrating for him. And we said, okay, well, we've gone through that pain now, but what can we do about it for the future? And he said, okay, how about we help others out? So we went away and he wrote a blog. He ran a brown bag to educate people on how to use this tool. And we just offered to help people out. So all kind of proactive ways to just, yes, we realise that we've gone through the pain, but let's kind of help others out. So a great way to use this tool to reflect on a large period of time, identify ways that you might have not been feeling so great a little while ago, and you probably would have forgotten that if you just asked what wasn't working so well. So a great way to use this tool. Next, I want to introduce to you the Starfish retro, a technique that I learned quite a few years ago when I was originally working at Suncorp, but I used it more since then. Cool. So with this technique, I find that it's a good way that if you're having a bit of resistance of moving away from, what doesn't work well, what still puzzles me, that technique, this is kind of like very similar, but on a stepping stone. So how does it work? So you draw up all these 5 quadrants, going through what you want the team to start doing, stop doing, keep doing, etc. And you ask the team to again reflect on what was happening during that time using sticky notes. So we ask the team to bring them up onto our whiteboard, put them up there, and then we'll go through each category one by one, making sure we all understand each other and looking for commonalities in some of the notes for when we get to working out what to discuss later. So we might group some of the notes together. So from there, once we've gone through all the categories, Then it's probably important to prioritize what you want to talk about, because there's going to be a lot of stuff up there. So how you can do this is using the voting system. Basically, it's a really quick way of just everyone grabs a whiteboard marker, goes up to the note that they want to talk about, and you can use 5 or however many you want to use, and put dash votes up there. So you can use 1 on one note or 5 on one note if you really want to talk about it. And so that allows you to kind of have a priority of what to discuss. And you go into detail about those particular notes, get team to share what they were thinking when they put that note up there, and identify ways that you can improve, identify actions. So where I ran this was when I was working at Seek last year. And I was working with a team who'd just finished a project. They had some people moving on and some staying together. And because of this, we said, well, let's use this as a learning opportunity. Let's work out, like, not all the actions that we use today can't be applicable to everyone. So let's use this to work out how you want to work better with other teams in the future. So just a slight twist on this retro technique. And from what I observed, it works quite well. So it's just a different way of running your retro, asking different questions, leading to different insights. The next technique is the hot air balloon, or simply known as ropes and fuels. I learnt this from a guy in the audience, Ben Wheeler. Taught this to me, and I tried it out a couple of weeks ago. It works really well. So this is a fun and creative retro because we asked the team to draw everything on the board. They get to draw the hot air balloon, they get to draw the basket and the ropes. And one thing that I learnt is just make sure you give them a bit of guidelines, otherwise you get a balloon that takes up the entire whiteboard and there's no space for any notes. So, as I've kind of alluded to, that's how you kick it off. You ask the team to volunteer and draw. And they can be as creative and out there as they want. They could draw a cloud, they can draw a seagull, whatever it is. And we're focusing on 2 categories. We want to look at the fuels. There are the things that we do as a team that give us forward momentum. And we want to look at the ropes. They're the things that currently hold us back from achieving what we want to achieve. So very simple, just 2 different categories to reflect on. So similar to other approaches, we personally reflect for a little bit. We write down on sticky notes, bring them up. And again, you can use voting to prioritise the discussion. So that's what I did with our team just a few weeks ago, so my team at REA. And we identified one glaringly obvious thing that we needed to improve. And that was that we as a team had a lack of short-term planning. And there was a couple of contributing factors to this. We'd gotten caught up in our own success. We had a previous release and we're like, yeah, we did an awesome job, but we forgot to plan for the future. So lesson learnt there. And there's also a bit of organisational politics on where our team fits into the structure. But we said, let's put that aside because we can't impact that. And let's focus as a team. And so we did that. So using this technique, we said, okay, lack of short-term planning is holding us back. So what are we going to do about it? And we discussed and came up with a couple of action items. We said, okay, let's introduce planning meetings for getting back into that iteration kind of planning rhythm. We'd been kind of continuous delivery Kanban approach. And we said, well, let's put a bit of formality into place for this time being, just to get into a bit of a rhythm. And we also made it abundantly clear to our product manager that we needed a bit of clarity on our backlog. And he's been overly zealous and gone away and taken this to heart and made it very clear on what we need to do. So, a fun way to reflect on what things push us forward as a team and what things hold us back. The next technique I want to introduce to you is one that's really good for creating a positive environment and really just to give ourselves a pat on the back, but work out ways that we can improve even further. And this is the appreciative retrospective. So how we go about running this is we draw up this kind of table on board with both a backward-looking component and a forward-looking, so past iteration and the future. And we want to collect thoughts on 3 different areas. What are the team's strengths? What are successes? And what are the events that happen? So a team member joining, that should be probably good news. And so we start off by reflecting in the past. What's happened in our team in the last iteration? And so looking at all the positive things, we can write up sticky notes, put them up on the board, and look at all the awesome things that we do as a team. And so we then read through them, make sure we're all on the same page and know what we've talked about. And then we go future looking. We look towards the future and say, okay, think about where we want to be whenever we run our next retrospective. And think about how we can get even better as a team. And so once you've done this, then you look to bridge the gap. Where can we go from where we are now to even better in the future? And so from there, we come up with a number of items to discuss and action items on ways that we can improve. And so that's what we did when I was working with another team at Seek, and we just finished a project. I mean, rather successful. We said, okay, we're sticking together and we're working on the next project. So how can we get even better? And so one of the items that one of our team members came up with said, well, there's this new code deployment tool being used in the company called Git. And it seems like it's better than what we're currently using. So how about we give it a go? So we said, sure, let's do it. So he was so passionate about it that in a 2-week period, he not only found out how to set it up in his own environment and get it working across our entire dev environment, he trained the entire team, and within 2 weeks we'd adopted it and just moved forward. So a really good example of how when you put away the negative thoughts and what's not working so well, focus purely on the positive, and you can get some really good outcomes that you may not necessarily arrived at using a traditional format. Cool. Another tool that I'd like to introduce to you is FRIMSH for short, but it stands for Frequency and Impact. And it's a technique to look at all the events that happen within our team and understanding how often do they occur, but what's the impact to the team. You don't necessarily get that from what worked well and what didn't work well. So how you go about running this is, as a facilitator, drawing up your axes and then asking the team to reflect on what are the events that have happened in this past period, and then for them to make their personal judgment on what's the impact, either positive or negative, and how often does it happen. And so once we've done this, you can go about it in 2 ways of how you lead the discussion. You can use voting, which I've introduced to you previously, or my team at REA, we decided that we want to focus on what's not working so well and look at the high frequency, high impact events and work our way up. So that seems like a pretty logical way to prioritise the discussion, and we got through quite a bit. And so as you're going through each of these notes, you want to dive into it in a bit of detail, understand what's going on, and as a team collectively come up with some ways that you can improve through action items. So that's what we did with my team at REA. We did this about a couple of months ago. And what we found through this technique is we realised that a number of teams were sharing our own instance or our own environment of CartoDB. And if anything went wrong, it impacted a lot of people. And said, okay, what can we do about this? We want to prevent ourselves from getting caught up in this whirlwind if it ever does happen. And we said, okay, we'd previously worked on a CloudFormation template, which is basically a way of setting up an environment very quickly in Amazon Web Services. And said, how about we push that out to other teams out there and say, you can spin up your own instance, your own environment whenever you want. So we went with a bit of, let's go out and try and help others out there and work out how we can migrate them off our own environment and avoid this kind of catastrophe or potential catastrophe in the future. So that's what we did. And you can see that through this particular technique, you get to understand what are the things that regularly occur and have a negative impact on your team. And you don't necessarily get that from what didn't work so well. So a good just alternative to the traditional format. My second last format for today is a really interesting retro format that was introduced to me last year by a guy called Neil Killick, and it's called Jeopardy. It's loosely based on the TV game show Jeopardy. And what makes this particular technique quite interesting is it reverse engineers what people are thinking. And so instead of asking questions off the bat, it says, what are answers? And these are the sticky notes that you can see up there. What are answers to questions? And that's what the team contributes. They put their answer to a question up there, keep the question to themselves. Because when we start going through this technique and everyone's put their answer up on the board, we then, as a team, ask them, cool, what do you think the question was to that answer? So it's not up here, but say communication. This is always a good one. One person might think communication is great, but you find that maybe your product manager thinks communication is really poor at the moment. I kind of feel left out of the loop. I'm a busy person. You're always interrupting me. You always find out these differences of opinion, and even more so when the person who came up with the answer provides it up, tells the team what it is. So as you're going through each of these items one by one, you find out of that difference of opinion and say, okay, what can we do to improve on that? What can we do differently? So that's where you come up with the action items. So again, another example from my team at REA. You might be starting to realise that I use them as my guinea pigs for all the different retro techniques that I like trying out. And we did this technique, and again, communication came up. We realised that we were making changes to story cards, particularly the acceptance criteria, after we kicked off a story card. And we said, well, a couple of people in the team knew what was going on, but not everyone knew what was going on. And particularly if it's a tester that doesn't know what's going on, it kind of causes a few issues along the way. So said, okay, what are we going to do about this? So we came up with a few ways that we collectively as a team wanted to make sure we kept everyone on the same page. We said, okay, let's always make sure we communicate in some shape or form when there's a change to a story card after we've kicked it off. So we might just grab the people behind us. We might send out an email to everyone, or we might just mention it as stand-up. So that's what we did, and since then we've gotten a lot better at just making sure everyone's on the same page, and we've improved on that process to make sure that we understand what's going on. So just a different format that's out there that you can use to find out when people have differences of opinion. And you don't necessarily get that from the traditional format. You might have like sticky notes in one area and one area, but this makes it very glaringly obvious when there does come to that situation. So finally, the last technique that I want to introduce to you today is called race car. It's one that I haven't tried out myself, but it's one that I want to try out next week when I go back to my team. And it's very similar to a technique that I learned last year when I was here at this very conference, and that was called speedboat. And the topic was about bringing gamification into our workplace, and you're using them, particularly in this scenario, in retrospectives. And how the gamification element comes in is having the drawing aspect. So similar to the hot air balloon, we draw everything on the board, and it could end up very interesting with seeing how people draw cars. So we draw up all the elements: the parachute, the car, the bridge, and the abyss. The parachute and the engine represent the things that are happening in the past, things that have happened in this last fortnight or period of time. So the parachute's what is holding us back, and the engine's what's pushing us forward. And I think more interesting is the future-facing part, is the bridge, what's going to push us, get us to where we want to be, or the abyss. That's where catastrophe hits us, and that's where we want to look out for and mitigate anything that's going to happen in the future. So as a team, once we've had a bit of fun in drawing all the aspects up there, With Speedboat, everyone loves drawing the iceberg and you know, people screaming on the boat. Don't know what you do here, maybe, I don't know. But basically, when you go through this exercise, the team is reflecting on these 4 elements and you're working out where can you improve on them. So you can use the voting system again to prioritise the discussion. And what I find is that you always find a few interesting points in the abyss section. Or in the Speedboat example, the iceberg. So you're looking out for ways that you can continuously improve, either the backwards facing, so what's happened in the past, or what's going to hit us in the future, or what's going to push us to where we want to be in the future. So technique, haven't tried, but I'm going to try it next week, and I'd like you to try it as well when you go back to your workplace on Monday. So, unfortunately, that's all I have time for today. There's plenty of more retrospective formats out there. But just to recap, we went through a definition of what is a retrospective, just so we had context. It's about regularly meeting so that as a team we can reflect on how we're going and work out ways that we can continuously improve. I think that we should change away and move away from what didn't work well and what still puzzles me, that format, because it gets boring, it gets stale, and we get the same insight every single time. So there's lots of new retrospective formats that you learned today. There's Speedboat, there's the appreciative retrospectives, there's Jeopardy, lots of different formats out there to bring a bit of fun back to your retrospectives. So with that, I think I've got 3-ish minutes for questions, so I'll just open it up now. And if you don't get time now, you can always send me a tweet, connect with me on LinkedIn, otherwise I'll be hanging out at the Elaborate stand. So we've got a question here.
So with your both different techniques, you try to capture as much information throughout the sprint cycle before you get to the retro, is that right?
Yeah, that can definitely help. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the iteration manager or scrum master. Yeah.
Did you find you get more output out of people who don't seem to like to speak?
Sorry, what's the last part to that question?
I find it with a lot of our retros, you get people in there that just don't speak.
Yes. Yep.
So did you find you get a lot more input from them if you're collecting information slated right on the board sort of honestly along the way?
Yeah, I suppose the good thing about using sticky notes is it kind of introduces that that anonymous aspect, and so people that don't really want to speak up have that opportunity. I also look out for those people as well, and so if I've noticed that they haven't talked, obviously it needs to be a comfortable environment to do this, but I ask them, you know, what did you think about this? Because we've got a couple of people in our team where it's less culturally acceptable to speak up, or it's more culturally more so that they wait for everyone to speak before they come in, and then they don't necessarily know when to jump in. So that's why I kind of look out for those people and just ask them questions. Cool. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
Have you got any tips for running retrospectives with a distributed team?
This question. So unfortunately I don't, because I've been very, very fortunate to work with co-located teams. But I know there's a lot of people out there. If you find anyone from realestate.com, my team's co-located, but there's many teams that are distributed. They use a number of tools out there, and there might be someone in this audience that's run a retrospective distributed. Yep. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. We've used Trello, so just set up like a couple of different categories. So like the 5-star one, you could just set up a column for each of those, and then just get people, with the open just to contribute to that. And you can talk about it afterwards.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. I'll take one more question.
Have you tried applying these, so you just like draw up a big board somewhere in the organisation and just get random people outside of the team to start providing feedback?
I haven't myself. I have seen it used, and sometimes you get that scenario where just no one puts up any feedback. So I suppose you just have to create environment and create awareness that that's what you're trying to do, and make it acceptable for people to put up there. That's where I have seen other people trying to do it. But again, there's more than likely someone out here who's given it a go and learned from it. Cool. So thanks for coming along. Yep.